without divulging the actual association and name of the people that are up here, I have a couple of questions. Those of you that have participated in Zipcar. Okay. Those of you that have participated in Nice Ride. Look at that. A lot of saddle sores out there. And those that have participated in HOURCAR. Okay, so now you know your audience. Panelists. And I'll start down on the end. I'm not going to go through the bio. That's in the paperwork that you've had and it's posted. But we've got Brian Harvey from Zipcar. Bill you've already met from Nice Ride. Megan Hansen from HOURCAR. And our hired provocateur, hired meaning we gave him a brownie at lunchtime, so that's the cost. Our hired provocateur, David King from Columbia / soon Arizona State University. So, to the three businesses that witnessed those that didn't raise their hand when we asked who participated in your services, give us the elevator pitch to sell your service to those people that didn't raise their hand. Brian?
Well, good afternoon. Zipcar has been around for 16 years now. We were founded in 2000 out in Boston, and today we are the world's leading car sharing organization. We have over 950,000 members in 8 countries, stretching from Istanbul in the east to Hawaii in the west and throughout North America and Europe. Our system is a membership model. You have to become a member to use Zipcar, and you can pay by the month or pay by the year. So those 950,000 plus members that I mentioned are active fee-paying members. So all of them are active participants on a monthly and yearly basis in Zipcar. And once you have a Zipcar membership, you're then able to use any of the cars in our fleet. And that ranges at any given time from about 11 to 14,000 vehicles in the system. And they range from small fuel-efficient cars like a Toyota Prius or a Ford C-Max up to sedans, SUVs, crossover vehicles, pickup trucks, cargo vans, even luxury cars. And they are available by the hour or the day, with gas, insurance, and 180 miles included with that. So we see a variety of different use cases, from commuters who come into an urban center on public transit or carpooling, using it to get to and from meetings or appointments or a backup in case their kids' school calls, to people using it to live car-free or car-light, who live in dense urban neighborhoods. Certainly students, and we've been serving the students, faculty, and staff on and around the University of Minnesota campus, along with 500 plus other campuses, this particular campus since 2006, 2005, 2006, with a variety of transportation options. And businesses and governments use Zipcar as well, too, to reduce their personally owned fleet and maximize that asset.
Thanks, Brian. That was a tall building. Okay, Bill.
All right, so I want each of you to think of your last great vacation that you took in any city, anywhere in the world. You went out to dinner, you went and walked along the riverfront, you went to a museum, you went to a ball game. Now, how many of you were thinking, wow, I really enjoyed spending time traveling around that city in a car? No. You want to get out, you want to walk, you want to ride a bike. When you want to do that in your own hometown, explore your own city in the same way, use Nice Ride.
Thank you, Bill. Megan.
All right, is this working? All right, so I'm Megan Hansen, I'm the program manager of HOURCAR, and I won't repeat everything that Brian said, because we do a lot of the same stuff, logistically speaking. What makes us different is it's a couple things. One, we're not the largest in the world, obviously, but we are the largest station-based car sharing operator in the Twin Cities. We are 100% local, nonprofit, which means that everything that we make in providing the service in some of those core areas where we operate gets back and reinvested in the community. And we're 11 years old. For 11 years, we've been pushing the boundaries of where car sharing can work in the Twin Cities and bringing it to communities in areas that weren't served or underserved, and we take great pride in that. We currently have about 65 cars and 50 locations across Minneapolis and St. Paul. I think that's about it.
Thanks, Megan. So we heard from Tom that to hire the best and the brightest these days, there needs to be a purpose behind your organization. There needs to be a set of goals people can aspire to and help you deliver. What's your bullet for your organization's goals? And we'll start back with you, Megan, if we could.
Sure. Our fundamental goal always has been and will be to support the multimodal lifestyle, which is to enable people to bike, walk, and take transit most of the time. And we do that by providing an option to have a car when you need one, because let's face it, there are times in the Twin Cities, almost no matter where you live, that you need a car to get somewhere. So we do that by providing a car only when you need it. Our goal is to do that in as many places and bring that to as many people across the Twin Cities as we can. Like I said, we've been doing that for 11 years, going into places where no one else serves or where we feel there's a need that isn't being served, and figuring out how we can make it work. And so we're really devoted to this community, this market, and figuring out how we can make it work here in a place like the Twin Cities that is not very dense, has a lot of great freeways, a lot of parking, and in some ways it's not a great fit. We're really devoted to going into those communities and figuring out how can we make this an option so that people who otherwise wouldn't have the option of not owning a car can have that option. So that's our overarching goal, and always has been, and will continue to be as long as we can continue to operate here. So.
Thanks. Bill?
So our goal is to make active transportation mainstream so that if you ride your bike to come speak at a conference, people don't think you're strange. And the challenge that we have is we started with one tool that is a very visible tool. People see bike share and people want bike share, but it doesn't work everywhere. So bike share works in urban areas where you have to pay to park and where there's a lot of density and a lot going on. You get much outside of that area and it's really hard to make bike share work. What we've been doing is trying to develop some new tools. Some of them have worked, some of them have failed miserably, but we're going to keep trying that because our goal is not just to put bikes out there in the street, but to make active transportation mainstream.
Right.
And like Bill, our mission is a little bit larger too. It's been the mission that we started with back in 2000. It's to enable simple and responsible urban living.
That's great. If I could put a commercial element, not a commercial element, but maybe more of a capitalistic spin on this, all three of you would benefit from decreased auto ownership. All three of your business models would benefit from decreased auto ownership. If not, if you were really hardline capitalists, it would be to dispose of auto ownership. What does that mean for a city, David? What does that mean for the construct of a city when you take that attachment of goods, a very large piece of good, out?
Well, it means a lot of things, obviously. There's opportunities, and then there's costs associated with it. And we spend a lot of time, certainly yesterday and today, we're focused on a lot of the opportunities. That a lot of what we're talking about is very blue sky. It's like people can own cars less, use cars less, drive less. We can be better stewards of the environment, and so on and so forth. But we also have to recognize the fact that over the last 50 years, we have been building American cities around the automobile. And to take that away is going to isolate people. It's going to leave people stranded. As everybody's noted, there's a real benefit to density of these systems. There's a benefit to centrality of these systems. And we do need to be very careful that we're not just providing more options where options already exist. More options are good, more choices are good, but there's going to be a very difficult transition, especially in suburban locations, very auto-oriented locations. As cars become less useful, the relative cost of those locations is going to increase. They're going to become less desirable. So this becomes a real challenge, and it can't be addressed city by city. These are challenges that really need to be regional in focus. That the region has to balance its transportation needs. And not everything is going to be, let's get rid of autos, because there's a lot of places that simply depend on them.
So I'm going to change up the question. We rehearsed a little bit on this next one. But there are a lot of transit agencies. There's the Metropolitan Planning Organization is here, and well-represented counties are represented that have to provide provide transportation in all forms to their populations. You're sitting down and you're having a conversation you're having lunch with the head of one of these transit organizations, these mass transit or an organization that's responsible for delivering or funding a transit organization. What's that conversation like? What they're worried about their future, you're worried about your future, you're coexisting. What's that conversation like, Brian?
Well, I'm not terribly worried about my future. I'm sorry if that sounds a little pretentious. I do think there's opportunities, and I'm not terribly worried about their future. I think smart conversation and collaboration means that there's evolution on both sides. And the Zipcar model is not intended to replace public transit. Rather the opposite. We need robust public transit for the traditional car sharing model to survive, and we want our members to be using it. I'm not getting in, when I sold my daily driver, it didn't mean that I was getting in a Zipcar every day to drive to work, let that car sit there all day, and then drive it back home to the same location at the end of the day. Rather the opposite, I'm then using public transit, right-of-way, walking and biking, Nice Ride, Uber, other technologies in concert with using car sharing. I guess in that conversation, I would say that there is opportunities for more collaboration, and there's opportunities in particular for that last mile issue, which is always a popular conversation topic. And quite honestly, I don't know that anybody's fully solved it because there's huge challenges with that.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that because what you highlighted is something that is really critical in the context of policy to understand. You don't replace an auto with transit. You don't replace an auto with car share. You replace driving with all of these other modes. And so if the public focuses all of their attention on public transit, mass transit, they focus all of their attention on bike share, car share, whatever, they're missing the fact that to replace the utility of an automobile, you have to replace it with multiple modes because people are going to start choosing how to get around based on the utility of individual trips. And this is a dramatic shift in the way we think about our transportation systems. So I just wanted to highlight that that's a really important thing, that you replaced your daily driver with all of these options. And that means we can't give short shift to walking. We can't give short shift to bicycling, even though people aren't going to do that every day.
Megan, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on a couple of things that both of you said. I think, contrary to Brian, I guess, I do worry, partly because I work for a nonprofit and we worry about stuff. That's kind of in our nature. But mostly I worry because I worry for all the people who aren't served and don't have these options yet. Like you started to raise, I mean, we don't need to keep adding options on top of options. There are places, even in the Twin Cities, where we have 4 car sharing operators competing with each other. So they're doing just fine, but then 80% of St. Paul is not served at all. So what do we do about that? And that's what I worry about as a nonprofit who's devoted to this community. How do we sort of, maybe continue to layer, but also think about how do we broaden the reach? And that's where I think there's really important room for innovation and conversation. And I think, especially where collaboration comes in, I don't know exactly what that conversation looks like, sitting together. Some of the transit folks are here, and we've had some good conversations, and I think it really starts with, one, recognizing that we need each other, fundamentally, and then just being open to that conversation about seeing where our strengths are, where your strengths are. And I think we've started to have those conversations really well locally, and recognizing that all the different modes need each other, and like Brian said, maybe we can solve some of the last mile issues, or maybe there's options that we don't even think of because we don't know what the other mode is struggling with, whether it's bike share or transit or car sharing or whatever it is. I think it just starts with recognizing that collaboration is really important, and we're not going to reach, especially some of those really difficult areas to serve that we want to serve, without figuring out how to do it in some different way, and that's going to require partnerships.
So Bill, the 3 that have spoken prior to you would suggest that all of your bike stations are right next to, I don't know, maybe a transit stop.
Mm-hmm. We've done a pretty good job of that one.
So you're having that lunch with that.
Yep.
transit.
So I've had that lunch, and here was what I told the folks I was sitting across, is that we need a director of innovation. So whether you're at Metro Transit or the city, we need the function, somebody who has the experience that can reach across silos, is comfortable talking about the cycle of development of software, has worked in a business context, because the way we are going to optimize big data for transportation is through communicating with entrepreneurs that are investing billions of dollars to develop these systems, not sitting back and waiting for them to put the product on our plate. And so the example I would use is we talked a lot about paratransit today. I bet there's at least 10 people in this room right now that are trying to track what they can do for their county or their city in the paratransit arena. And if you call Uber, they're not going to call you back because they've got 1,000 people in the similar role around the country trying to do the same thing. At a regional level, we need somebody who's responsible for innovating in that sphere and speaks the language of the entrepreneur and can talk about the software development as well.
As I was listening to the conversation earlier and some of the discussion you had and conversations earlier about paratransit, there's a latent supply there too. The folks that have the vehicles that are tricked out to allow for them to have mobility, the people that can't, need a special use vehicle, they're not using it all the time either. So there's got to be an untapped resource within all that. So,
John, I'll say too,
yeah, sure.
From what I said about not being worried about public transit, if you follow and listen to Tom Fisher, maybe we should be. In his theory, that's a moot conversation for what autonomous vehicles will do for it.
So we're going to put our long-term investor hat on, and the local newspaper was pretty full of conversations about autonomous and ownership, and the OEMs, as we affectionately call Chrysler and Ford and GM. They're all ganging up. They're buying small companies, large companies that specialize in autonomous technologies. Tesla, you can operate autonomously today. And by the way, for those that own a Tesla, you can operate in a city autonomously today. But you didn't hear that here. You didn't hear that here. My brother told me that. So this new technology, these new collaborations that are happening, what does that do to the Zipcar model, if anything? Where do you see Zipcar 10 years from now when driverless is rolling off the factory floor?
Well, there's almost two questions there about the entrance of the OEMs into this space more aggressively, and we think it's great. We're excited about more people waking up and coming to the party. Competition breeds innovation, and they bring a lot to the table. With that said, about the future and kind of more the autonomous and the progression of that, I will say it's one thing to build a car, it's another thing to write software, it's another thing altogether to manage an actual fleet. And we feel at Zipcar that we're uniquely positioned with our 16 years and over 10,000 cars in our fleet to be able to do that and manage that fleet, whether it be self-driving or an autonomous sort of fleet. And actually, our parent company is the Avis Budget Group, the rental car giant. They manage a fleet of 500 million cars around the globe. There's very few organizations out there that have experience at managing large fleets, and that will be a big part of the autonomous vehicle. Today, you order your Zipcar and you go to it. In the future, we do believe the Zipcar will come to you.
So, Bill, before I hand it to you, a colleague of mine and I were talking about autonomous vehicles a few years ago, and she got really excited because she realized that even if she lived, which she didn't at the time, but if she lived in a suburban context, she could take her 2-mile walk in the morning before work and have the car pick her up on the end of that walk and take her into the office. And that was like really attractive to her because, if you live 10 miles from work, you're not going to be able to take the 10-mile walk to get your exercise and you're stranded, or you have to meet transit. Your model could do the same thing, right? Somebody could take a bicycle from their house or the nearby station, take it the distance they want to go, and then have it finished off with autonomous. How do you see autonomous affecting, if at all, or maybe even amplifying your business?
I think it just comes back to fewer people owning cars, fewer people will use bike share. Or more people will use bike share.
Right. Megan?
I mean, it's a complicated question. Obviously, people are talking a lot about autonomous cars. It's talking about it everywhere. And I think part of our role as a nonprofit will be to kind of keep everyone's eye on the ball. I mean, what is this technology actually going to do for people? And the technology in itself doesn't resolve any of the fundamental issues that we have. Like, the fact that 80% of St. Paul is not served by car sharing at this moment, or the behavioral change that we need to see in people giving up their cars. I mean, in some ways, we'll have the same issues with autonomous vehicles as we do now as far as behavior change. So I think we want to just keep our eye on what is this actually doing for society. Are we making sure we're maximizing the social benefit? Are we making sure that it's equitably applied, that we can make it more affordable for lower income communities so that it can be useful in less dense communities? Those are challenges we haven't overcome in any form yet. And if that technology can help us do that, we will absolutely embrace it. But we're going to first and foremost keep our eye on what our mission is, which is bringing alternative transportation to as many people in the Twin Cities as we possibly can. And I think, frankly, just as speaking to an academic community, I mean, the data really is out on whether autonomous vehicles for car sharing would increase or decrease vehicle miles traveled. I've seen models that show that because of the empty trips, it would actually increase vehicle miles traveled. I've seen other models that showed the opposite, and I think we need to really keep our eye on that and make sure it actually does have a social benefit, because there's pretty clear evidence in car sharing that it decreases vehicle miles traveled. But that data is really not in yet, or even, I don't know if it's even being collected really. I mean, it's not possible at this point, but we need to keep our eye on and watch where that goes.
Oh, but I think it is being collected. I do think it is being collected. We do know. We're just not being told what we're telling. We're not being told what we're telling the people that know what we're doing. That's probably the best way to put it. David, they're having thought quite a bit about the advent of autonomous vehicles. There are perils, there are possibilities, there are promises. It plays into not only just the mobility, but the construct of the cities. But what keeps you up at night as a worry on autonomous vehicles? As if we don't get it right, beyond the things people talk about, sprawl and all that sort of stuff. But what are some of the more subtle and more glaring worries that people haven't brought up?
There's a number of things. I don't know that this keeps me up at night as much as it keeps me occupied during the day.
Problem solver.
Well, I like this stuff. First, we've been talking about autonomous vehicles and paratransit a lot. It's not. I've done a fair amount of work on paratransit in my own research and with TRB, and it's not clear to me there's a lot of benefits to be gained from autonomy within the paratransit service, in part because paratransit requires trained drivers who can handle the traveler. And we're still going to require that many of the people who need paratransit are going to need a provider to be on the vehicle. So there might be some gains in terms of somebody with a bad driving record can now be a paratransit provider, but you're still going to need somebody who's picking them up. Right now, the paratransit can go from the vehicle to the front door. Maybe we can extend that range. Maybe we can do some other things and improve paratransit, but it's not obvious that autonomy will change paratransit much. But I think one thing that listening to this panel and what might happen with autonomous vehicles, in planning, we've long talked about the relationship between transportation and land use and how there's a codependence of transportation and land use. And planners love to talk about how land use responds to transportation, as though the relationship is strengthening. And I think it's worth considering that the relationship between transportation and land use is weakening. And what we're seeing is a lot of innovation within the transportation sector based on a durable land use. The land use patterns that we have now are very similar to land use patterns we had a few years ago. And the land use patterns we're going to have in 20 years or 30 years, we're looking at the buildings we're going to have. And so our transportation systems are going to have to adapt to what we have. It takes a very, very long time to turn over our built environment. And what we're seeing is innovation in the transport sector that isn't dependent on a certain type of built environment characteristic. It's adapting to what we have. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to grapple with. I think we also have, I'm only partially joking when I say America's greatest natural resource is surface parking lots. This is an opportunity where we're going to be able to, with these services, with autonomous vehicles, we're going to be able to rethink fallow land, and sites that were not previously developable will be developable. But is it going to be that all these residential houses are suddenly going to get a 600 square foot screened in porch because they're not going to need their garage anymore? Like, there's a lot of things that are going to happen, and I do worry that with the autonomous vehicles, the policymakers and the planners and others are so focused on the technology that they're not paying attention to sort of the basic nuts and bolts of how we build cities, which doesn't, and the geometry of that and the process of that and what we want out of cities doesn't change just because we're no longer driving our cars.
A significant concern, and there's quite a growing interest both on the industry side as well as on the public sector side and the policy side to start having a dialogue, which didn't exist literally 2 months ago. That the people that were developing the technology really didn't want to have a conversation with the policy side, any beyond having a rule that allowed them to operate their autonomous cars in a particular state. And the response of the industry has been pretty interesting to that silence on policy. Google goes to Texas because they have no policy. They leave California and they go to Texas to test their pods in the public realm because Texas has no rules. And California's rule is you have to have a certified driverless driver in the driver's seat of a driverless car. Congratulations. So, let's open it up to the audience a bit and get the dialogue. I've got a few more questions, but let's please open it up to the audience. I got Lee in the back.
My question is, I think we all see the strength of the network platforms and how they can, as they grow, they can bring a lot of benefits with them. But they can also crash if they're not, and I think it comes to this curator function that needs to be managed in terms of the system. I wonder if you could comment about that, because that's why a lot of these things grow and then they crash just about as fast as they grow, if not faster. What if you could comment about that? And if we're going to have more of these kinds of systems and more of how does that piece come about?
So directed specifically at autonomous, or are you just talking about platform in general? Platform in general. So you've got to be wrestling with it. Zipcar's platform's got to be, that's it, right? That's the only ingredient. That goes down, everything goes down.
Yes, and fortunately on the software and the technical side, we have some great people that are not me who focus on that. More kind of platform as product side in thinking that. Zipcar's model is a station-based round trip, and that's the model that we believed was the most, that fit with our mission, as well as was the best business model. 14 of our 16 years, that was the case. And we've started to open up the possibility with some testing and now full launches of expanding what our model is into a more flexible model. But we're doing it slowly and smart. Boston, we have a both traditional round trip as well as a station-based one-way, very similar if you've used Nice Ride. The difference is that with a Zipcar, you can actually reserve your spot in a station in advance at the beginning of the ride to guarantee parking if you want to. In other municipalities, we're working with a model that has more of a free float element to it. But in terms of, to try and address some of your question, boom and bust or growth that then disappears, and certainly in the car sharing space in particular, we've seen some players have some large growth and then large contraction and even pull out of markets altogether or go out of business or that close that side of the business. I'd say related specifically to Zipcar, we have focused on slow and steady growth and going market by market. We may be national, international, but we do try to look at every market that we go into as its own unique entity, and maybe we'll start there as an airport only or university only market, or maybe we start there round trip and then maybe one way is the way to go. So we feel that's helping protect us from a big growth and then pullback, but the system as a whole, some of that's good competition though too. We like bold ideas.
Bill?
So I think we're a lot farther ahead on that front than you might realize. So it's about international standards, organizations, and we've had some huge successes. So kind of Portland led the drive to get real-time data from buses made available to anyone who's creating a user interface in the same format. Ridiculously successful. In a short period of time, Google and everybody else can tell you when your bus is going to arrive. We just did the same thing for bike share, and in less than a year, we adopted a North American standard that is now being adopted in Europe. It's amazing how fast these things come together because everybody sees the need for it. And so when the real-time data is going out in the same format and thousands of interfaces can provide it to you, you have pretty amazing redundancy in the system. We've done that with the internet itself. We can do it with transportation.
Well, I agree with everything they've said. I would just add one thing, which is that I think it's important to acknowledge that will happen in some places. I mean, companies do go in and then shrink and leave and things happen. We need to encourage a diverse marketplace as well, and particularly in these places where people are becoming dependent on these options. It's a lifestyle choice, and if one option leaves and that's the only provider that we have, that can be a big issue and really turn people off from committing to that lifestyle. And so I think we need to, and there are things governments can do to sort of put in ordinance that treats all companies equally and different things to promote a diverse marketplace, and just acknowledge that it's good to have multiple options. We need Zipcar and we need Car2Go, and we also need local folks like HOURCAR, because we do different things and we all undergo different changes, but ultimately somebody will be here providing car sharing.
And I think that type of redundancy or resilience to a shock, it's going to affect people differently. I think probably most people, if not everybody in this room, if there's a major snowstorm here in May or June or whenever, like it's a total surprise, but you guys could all work at home. Like we could work at home for a day or two. A lot of people don't have that choice. And so like there are those of us who have a lot of choices, and we're getting more choices. And then there's a lot of people who don't have any choices. You have a low-income household in the suburbs. We're seeing the suburbanization of poverty. And the suburbanization of poverty is in part related to the fact that these are low-access areas that are no longer desirable for people to bid up. And so if there's a terrible snowstorm or the road goes out or something like that, there's a lot of people who are stuck. And if you're working a service job, whether it's a high-value service job or low-value service job, you can't call that in. You can't work at home. And so there's going to be while the system and the regional economy might be perfectly resilient, there's going to be a lot of lumps in there that are going to be treated differently. And that's something that we just have to be very aware of. And not all of that is a transportation problem, but certainly we can help with it.
Hope could just wait for the microphone. Thanks.
You talk about choices in the metro area. How do these options survive or even exist in the rural areas? Uber isn't anywhere except in the Twin Cities. What about a Duluth and the Iron Range, where there isn't any of these services?
I've talked to a few people just at this conference alone. Interestingly, if you think about a rural community and you think about rural living, driving long distances to get a loaf of bread or those sorts of things, or to find a tool to fix your farming apparatus, that's pretty mind-numbing stuff. You're talking about people that work 16-hour days, and then they got to screw up their entire schedule and the care and feeding of animals and all the things that go along with obligation to go do something like that. And so autonomous is fit in that low-trafficked, long-distance environment would be a very curious advent for the people that live that particular lifestyle. The on-demand, human-involved trip, it's a hardship. It's difficult to see why, from a purely business perspective, somebody would go into a low-density environment and make that work. It seems that that when you start adding up some of the benefits and the negatives of the autonomous side, that this is something that we should be, banging the drums over and storming the walls and saying this, make this happen as soon as possible, because you can get it into the low equity communities very quickly, the socially challenged, economically challenged communities very quickly. It does promise a lower per mile cost. it does give access and time freedom to those people as well. So ideally, and I'm an autonomous vehicle advocate and evangelist, but ideally, that's where we want to be heading. Any other comments?
Well, I think, to build on that, I think you're right, but I think the bigger threat to the rural communities is that of investment, because we're not expanding the investment pie. We're not setting our investment based on a clear set of priorities. And the federal role of paying for transportation is declining. As with all of these choices increasing, it increases the claimants, the people who are advocating for a slice of the pie that exists, so everybody gets a little bit less. And the rural communities that are declining, and many of them are declining, are going to have a harder time maintaining very expensive road infrastructure. We're seeing many states throughout the country, they're taking some of their paved roads, turning them to gravel. They're reducing the quality of the roads. So I think maintaining the investment to keep those communities going, I don't think Duluth is necessarily threatened, but there's going to be towns just like when the interstates passed by, the state roads and it left towns obsolete. This continued urbanization is doing the same type of a thing, and there's going to be some sad tales that come out of it. And we haven't been good in the past of dealing with it, but maybe we can be better in the future.
It'd be interesting, though, to also ask is the agricultural community has long been a cooperative community. And the small towns have long been, and we heard Tom talk about it at lunchtime, they've long been sharing and cooperative communities and delivering service, volunteer fire departments, even taking care of children in the summer and things like that as a group effort as opposed to a singular family effort. So it'll be interesting to see how they take, if they haven't already and we just don't know about it, if they take the technology that's available to us, turn it into a sharing, much more sharing environment than they've already historically had, and therefore solve a lot of their problem or make their lifestyle better and a higher quality.
And,
did you guys want to add?
Well, I was going to say, Bill should talk because, while not totally rural, your mission is well beyond the Twin Cities at this point.
Yeah, and so my only thought on that is don't look just at this one tool and reject it because it doesn't serve everyone. Look at my overall organization and say, are we trying to develop things that serve everyone? That's fair, but I'm going to use the best tool for the job.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Wait for the microphone, please. Thanks.
I haven't heard the D word today, drones. If you could talk about their impact, not so much from a civil liberties perspective, but shipping, Amazon's going to start using them, we hear. Is this going to be a peer-to-peer thing? What might be that future?
Does anybody, anybody want to go first? Take it.
Okay, I'll go first. Just like some of these technologies work best in a dense urban area, drones work best in a less dense urban area, or a less dense area. You're not going to have drones going through uptown Minneapolis or things like that. That's just not going to happen. At least with current or near future drone technology, it's just too unproven. So there's also the drones, they can fly for a short period, one-to-one type of a package. They can carry a little bit. So I don't know what I wouldn't expect that is going to have a large effect in the near to medium term. I think that there are going to be some opportunities for mail delivery, package delivery, medicine delivery, things like that in more of the bigger lot suburban and exurban and rural communities. But in terms of the urban areas, I think they're going to be a complement sort of regionally to what's happening in the denser areas.
The energy consumption penalty for defying gravity is going to keep drones from becoming the answer to all delivery issues. That's an aerial drone. And I'm really surprised that we aren't hearing more about developing land-based drones that will deliver packages, even in a dense urban environment, will deliver packages off the back of a larger host vehicle and make those shuttles around and make that happen. But unless energy becomes much, much less expensive, it's really hard to see why that would ever make sense other than the short hit, small load, almost urgent needs that would be put in the air. Other questions? So while you're thinking of some more, and you got to challenge this group, we did ask each other to come up with a couple of little like factoids, because this is academia combined with public sector, and you all got to go away with a takeaway, some information you didn't have before. I'll go ahead and go first. Was looking up on the internet because the question is, what's the sustainable thing to do as it relates to your car? And many of us own cars or multiple cars. What's the sustainable thing to do? Should we think about jettisoning the car? Or should we think about driving less? And how does it work? The embodied energy in making the vehicles that we drive pretty much equates to the amount of energy that we use during that vehicle's life. So if you think about the idea that, I should just drive less, that'll matter. Well, you've already got half of your consumption of embodied energy, or of energy, has already happened when you left the showroom floor. So good that you want to reduce your miles, but maybe better that we have fewer cars if we apply a sustainable lens to the discussion of ownership and mobility. Anybody else have a little fact? Brian, from you, or from your?
Sure. Well, I mean, some of the facts you've seen, a lot of research being done out there on the impact of car sharing. Here, other schools, Susan Shaheen out at Cal Berkeley. The numbers vary a little bit from year to year. I think the most recent numbers are in the 12 to 13 cars are taken off the road by every car share vehicle. With Zipcar users in particular, they're self-reporting a savings of about $500 to $600 a month when they give up their personally owned car and switch to Zipcar use, along with a complement of other transportation options that's, again, not that personally owned car. Car share members drive less, VMT reduction of about 20%. They are walking more, public transportation more, biking 19% more. And 60% of Zipcar members choose not to buy a car or give up a car once they join. So the impact of car sharing is real, and it gets down to when you have that reduction in VMT, when you're looking at all these different modes, when you have an increase in walking and biking. If you want to talk about a real green impact, you're talking about 1,600 pounds of CO2 per year not being emitted by that car share user. That adds up, especially when you talk about 950,000 plus more with other organizations who have the round trip model. It's pretty significant, and it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Who else wants to offer a little factoid? Megan?
I'll do my best. I'm not sure I have a fun fact, but I do kind of want to, I've been looking at some of the statistics about, vehicle miles travel and the impact we're having, and there's some things that are starting to worry me a lot, which is, some of you all are nodding already. I think we saw vehicle miles travel decreasing a lot after, the crash, but all the stats that I've seen recently see that it's increasing again, whether that's overall or per capita. And so it's just an important reminder, I think, that we've come really far and we have a lot of great technology, but we have a really long way to go. And so we need to keep working on it and keep that in perspective. I think there's really good options. Like I said, we have such technology, we have such good ideas and innovation. And I think from an academic sphere, and there needs to be a lot of collaboration between the academic sphere and the public sphere and the private and nonprofit sectors to kind of figure out how do we keep pushing this in the right direction. Because we have so many options and things we can do, but we still have a really, really long way to go. And so how can we work together? What research can be done to help us figure out what solutions we need to push that back in the right direction, I think is just so important.
Okay, we'll do it a quiz. What bike share city has the highest number of trips per day per bike?
It's got to be Minneapolis.
Close. No, not even close.
Salt Lake.
It's Fargo. So Fargo got 23 trips per bike per day. with their 100-bike system. They just have 7 stations. But it does just demonstrate that it's not just New York City or Washington, D.C. There's some, and in their case, it was their relationship with the university and the automatic subscriptions that really drove it. But there's some fantastic things happening in small cities, too.
That's great. That's great. Dave?
2 things. One, all of these systems, and a lot of the systems that we're promoting as alternatives to driving, require a credit card. Credit cards require a bank account. In New York City, 10% of households don't have access to a bank account. In Phoenix, where I'm moving, it's close to 25% of households don't have access to a bank account. I don't know the figures for the Twin Cities. But at low incomes and for immigrant households, access to a bank account is rare. And this is a major, major barrier to entry. And as we're thinking about urban growth, we think about cities that are growing. We think about, I don't know if, like, in New York, we talk about New York is booming. It's expecting another 1 million people. New York is not growing from a native population. Native New Yorkers and and Americans are leaving New York in droves as they have. It's growing because of international immigration. The cities that are booming because of international immigration. And we need to make sure that these new urban citizens are incorporated into these choices that we're making, the policies that we're making, that they have access, and that we embrace this diversity of alternatives. We also need to keep in mind that with a lot of new migrants to the US, they come as auto aspirant. They want to drive. They want to drive at some point. And we need to be very sensitive of that. So I guess those are my little factoids to temper our enthusiasm a little bit.
And I think that might be a great opportunity for a public-private partnership, specifically addressing that barrier to entry from a bank account standpoint. And maybe that's that collaborative trust factor that bundling with inside this private-public partnership enables them to have the trust level that we can give them a car or a bike without that direct one-on-one bank account. I think that could be a great opportunity.
And there's been a lot of discussion today about does the transaction that currently happens from a private citizen's perspective and public transit, currently the transaction is very one way. I provide money or some sum of money, I pay my taxes off to the side, that goes around to the agency, or some fees, that goes around to the agency, my money goes to the agency, I get a means of mobility out of that. But if the conversation today starts to take root where there's incentives, there's programs where there's a back and forth of that transaction, where there's credits for doing the right thing, there's disincentives for doing the wrong thing, now you really have created what needs to be a digital linkage between the two, because those transactions can't be paper money and they can't be, pieces of paper for vouchers, and that's just way too hard and frankly unnecessary. But if we don't create this system where that transaction can occur, absent a credit card or absent some institutional form of banking, then we are gonna continue to leave people out, and that solution needs to be out there and needs to be pushed pretty hard. And obviously now, not even later, because the urgency is right now. So you do have, you panelists do have an audience of people that are at government agencies and those sorts of things. And having lunch with somebody and saying something is a little different than just having their ear and not being directly confrontational to them. If I were to, I grew up as a civil engineer. I still am. I had the really good fortune of coming out of school when computers were the thing. So I learned on the computers. I had the really good fortune of being in California during the 1989 earthquake. You ask why? Well, the civil engineering industry, and particularly bridge design, which I was doing, catapulted to the front of the world's queue on how to design earthquake-resistant bridges in particular, past China, or past Japan, who was thought to be the leader, past Italy, past all the seismic regions, way ahead. I'm now enjoying the catapulting of autonomous vehicles and what that clearly is going to do to our industry. To the agencies that employ a lot of people like me, my ask of you is to develop that same level of excitement that I have had, fortunately, about every decade of my career, to create that same kind of urgency and excitement for your otherwise, civil engineers are notorious for being the most boring people in the world, otherwise, well, maybe geotech are worse, actually, but otherwise, to catapult them, get them in front of this, take the technology, and don't start from where you are and incrementalize your way through where you need to go, but use that technology to vault you to the front and to excite your staff and your agency and your boards and your commissioners to embrace that in the absence of the old, and to let the old go. Because it is, the underlying theme here is you've got people that have created remarkable businesses and remarkable business models that are challenging your organizations. Let's be blunt. They're going to challenge your organizations. And you could wait for that challenge to take root, or you could decide to create a new challenge or to create a new opportunity as a result of that challenge to make it happen. But from your perspective, other positive and negative, I went a little negative on that one, but positive or negative, that you've got an audience of people that are lapping up your services for the most part, and also wondering what's going on. Is there a message of policy or a message of implementation or sharing or partnership that you want to have them hear now in a collective group?
Absolutely, and it's about leadership. The cities that have seen the most benefit from new mobility are the cities that have shown a lot of leadership on it, that have been, in some cases, out in front of the constituents that they represent. It takes some guts to say, no, we're going to take away this parking because having a single car parking spot here is actually not the thing that's best overall for the city, not just in the future, but today. That's sometimes a very unpopular move. Giving up the revenue from parking, looking at regulation that says, for example, right now, car share is taxed at about 23% sales tax in the Twin Cities. That's a huge amount on that.
There is a factoid. Now, grab onto that one for a little
That's
while.
the sales tax on top.
Wow.
If you want to incentivize these things, you have to be willing to make some bold decisions that have financial ramifications they're tough decisions to make. So, bold action and decisions do pay off. There are cities that work well on this and are ahead, and in some cases far ahead.
I agree with what Brian's saying here, and I would just add that, he got me with that rental tax thing, kind of hit a nerve.
Sorry.
We do pay car rental tax, so yes, I completely agree that we do need to, treat car sharing different than car rental because it's serving local people. And I think on top of that, like he's saying, the governments and leadership do need to do what they can do. I would say on top of that, we need to acknowledge that we are not New York, we're not Chicago, and it's never going to work out as easily to do car sharing here as it is there. That makes it even more important, I think, to do what we can as far as governance and leadership to influence what happens here. But we also need to face the fact that we have about a quarter of the population density of New York City. And like you were saying, that's not going to change very quickly in the future. It will over time, but that's what we have for now. And how are we going to work with that? And it's not going to happen as naturally as we may like. I think we need to show leadership. We need to do innovative things and decide if we really want to see shared mobility grow here. Because if we do, it's going to take a kind of commitment that it might not in a city that has the density much greater than ours.
So I'd throw out two themes. So one is that buying technology is different than buying roads and bridges. And that is such a fundamental thing that we need to train government officials in how to buy technology and interface with the cycle of development. And then the second is that for the first time in any of our lives, comprehensive planning is a totally different exercise than it used to be, because never in any of our lives have the major trend lines like home ownership, reurbanization, and car ownership shifted in the way they have in the last 5 years. So we kind of have to throw out the way we've done that and start over. And that takes a huge political will that I don't really think we've seen yet. I see mayors pushing for innovation, but I don't see planning departments saying, hey, we need to reevaluate everything.
Yes, I would just add somewhat along the lines of the tax, but we have to embrace prices as a way to both raise revenue to invest in what we want to invest in, but also change behavior to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And using prices of travel is the best way for us to do this. We don't have to just sit here and wait for what the technology is going to do to us and sort of waft over us and change our cities. We can implement prices to reduce congestion. We can implement prices to achieve all kinds of behavioral and revenue responses. And that's something that these new technologies and these new choices give us an opportunity to introduce pricing, in part because the public is going to be able to piggyback their pricing priorities on a paid model. And the paid model is going to be such that people are going to start to get used to paying for the trip. They're going to be used to renting a car for an hour or renting a bike for 30 minutes or whatever it is. And so we need to embrace prices as a way to achieve our goals. And those goals have to be set by how we want to, by whatever we want. We don't want to build more roads, or we want to move more people on transit. We need to price appropriately. And that's really the only thing that works. We're not going to be able to just build our way out of congestion. We're not going to be able to build our way to get a lot of people to ride the train. We have to embrace prices, and the technology is an opportunity for us to sneak it in. I mean, we want to tell the people, but we also want to sneak it in. So I think that we have to embrace the opportunities that this has for changing the way we do things. And the federal government is not going to be the leader in paying for transportation in the near to medium to probably long-term future. And we have to abandon that model where the federal gas tax is buying everybody lunch. That's done. And it's going to be up to cities, it's going to be up to regions, it's going to be up to states. And they're going to have to, they should invest in the things that make the most sense for them. In a lot of ways, these make far more sense because they're more cost effective. But we have to come up with user fees, we have to come up with prices, and we have to think about how to best use that money to serve our goals.
And I'm going to turn it over to Laura just a second. I'm going to leave you with so Minnesota DOT, here's your challenge, and the cities and counties. Don't build another lane mile. Don't build another lane mile. Use the technology, use the changing mobilities, foster those, develop those so that you don't have to build another lane mile.
John, I really want to ask a question, so you don't even need to turn it over to me yet. But I had the benefit of being on a pre-call with the group, and one of the topics I remember being of interest to a few of you is demographics and what you've been learning from your data. And so my question is, the data, what are some of the issues and opportunities associated with the data? What have you learned from it? And as a research institution, what other research questions do you still have? And how does data play into that?
From our perspective, on the surface, car sharing and Zipcar, we've always thought of ourselves as a youthful brand, a millennial-oriented brand. And what we were finding in some of our cities across the country is that our membership wasn't necessarily following that. And so finally we got smart and we commissioned some research, and it was fascinating. What it showed is the fact that urban baby boomers, or urban boomers, and these are people who self-identify as living in urban environments, have more in common with urban millennials than those urban millennials have in common with suburban millennials. It has to do more with where you live than necessarily your age group. The one big difference would be, and this was referenced yesterday, I forgot who was talking about their students would absolutely rather give up their car than their smartphone. And we attribute that to millennials. Well, that is a millennial trait, but as much an urban trait. And when you ask urban baby boomers, these urban boomers, what would you rather give up? It's very similar. They would much rather give up their car than their laptop. They're just a little kind of half generation behind the smartphone. So they're already there. They value the connectivity. They're in these more single-person dwellings, the single-person households. They value the experience versus the ownership. The amount in common, what we think of as millennial and actually these urban boomers, is staggering. And the fact that we're not talking more about them, and in particular urban dwellers, rather than just these mythical millennials, does a disservice in thinking about the future and the present in terms of planning for cities, planning for companies as well.
I'll just add one point is that bike share in New York looks very different than in Houston than it does in Minneapolis. It's completely different user bases. How does this tool work with your urban environment is the question.
Do you need a helmet here in Minnesota?
You don't.
You don't.
We give away a lot of helmets, but we don't
I bet
provide
you do.
them.
I bet you do. Wear a helmet.
I will just add a little bit, piggybacking off what Bill said. I think it is very local in a lot of ways. I mean, car sharing is car sharing, but there are really local challenges and really local issues and demographics as well. And so I would like to see more local research and things focusing on different, we look at all types of cities together often in the research and don't even have ways to pull that data apart. I've asked some of the researchers, can you tell me if car sharing is growing more in big cities versus small cities, and they can't. So I'd love to see more of that broken out in terms of the data and looking at some of that's hard because of data privacy issues and how the data needs to be consolidated. As a small organization, we're a staff of less than 10 people. We don't do as much with our data as we would ever like to be. So if there are researchers out there who'd like to work with our data, we're always happy to work with people to do that. And we're pretty open in being able to share our data with researchers. We'd like to see more done, definitely, especially in the Twin Cities around data. We now have users as well who are using the same card for HOURCAR as for transit. And so there's some interesting cross-referencing you could do there in data that we haven't even begun to explore with that kind of stuff as well. So I think the possibilities are out there. We could always use some help getting that stuff done personally.
I guess I would add a couple things on data itself. We're awash in data. And essentially there's enough data out there that anybody can make any case that they want about anything. And you can make it in a compelling way. And shifting through the baloney is really hard. Now, I think it's great to have more data. I'm a researcher. I like data. It's sort of my stock and trade. But we have to be careful about the data that we're getting. Is the data that we're getting answering the questions that we want to ask? And we need to ask the questions first and then try and find the data that we want to answer them. And I think in the period that most of us here would agree is a fairly transitional period with new technologies and such, what the long-term value of looking at the near-term past is not clear to me. Like, what are we supposed to learn about these last 3 years of data that will apply to how we're building cities in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, when these are mature technologies, they're either much bigger or they're smaller, and there's a lot of changes. Like 10 years ago, you could not have predicted what bike share would have done for biking because it just simply didn't exist in its scale. And so we have to be very aware and very, very circumspect in the way we approach that. And then something that we talked about at lunch, it's sort of related to how we have more data, but we don't necessarily know more. We need to be able to let our public embrace failure. And we need to let elected officials, we need to let our public agencies fail. They need to try stuff, and if it doesn't work, they need to back off and try something else. And somehow we need to come up with a way that they're not going to be punished. I mean, they're going to be punished. They're going to get kicked out of office. But we need to, I don't know how we overcome this, but we need to set up a system where we can allow failure so that many of these things that we're trying, they may not be permanent. Now, I love all these services, but it might not be right in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. One of the problems we have now is that we made automobility permanent. We made it the permanent condition. And I don't know that we want to do that with anything, yet alone something that's only been around for 5 or 10 or 15 years.
I'll pick up on something that John's been pretty active about and talking about. So you brought up the issue of whether paratransit, how much of that could go driverless as an example. Well, why don't we know? Why don't we know how much, what part of the paratransit trip requires another human being to be with what people in what condition, and what level of mobility, and what level of capacity. And if they're being walked by a caregiver from front door of dwelling or residence to the vehicle, do we need somebody in the vehicle, or can we, by design, have a vehicle that monitors that individual appropriately and could intervene, not necessarily the vehicle, but have the route intervene on their way if there is a problem, an eventuality that comes along, and then determine what the size of that market really is. And you have to look at it as a market, even though if we come anywhere near deciding to privatize or go public-private partnership with something like that. But that sort of research would be, because it's very likely that might be one of the first steps in driverless, is that we go with those that are underserved first, or unserved first, because it might just be an easier sell to the public to help, as opposed to insert a corporation into an environment and have them benefit, but rather to help those that could use additional assistance to improve their quality of life.
Final question?
Oh. Yeah, well, you can distribute it. You can make the call as to who gets it first.
Raise your hand again, please.
Now she's done.
Now she's got it.
Decisions. You can fail. It's okay.
Thanks. Thanks for coming all the way across the room, Hannah. Frank Dama with the Humphrey School. I'll give you the chance here to try to fix a problem in St. Paul, which is that the legislature is unable to do anything until they solve transportation. And the options that were just listed in the paper today were to increase license fees, increase the motor fuel tax, or pay from the general fund, none of which are really associated with what we're talking about with the sharing economy. In the meantime, we heard that there is a very, very high tax rate on vehicles that are shared here. So if you had the chance to tell them, here's the solution that's going to not only work now, but work in the future, what would it be? In 10 sentences or less.
Personal miles traveled. Personal miles traveled, not vehicle miles traveled. Personal miles, well, sorry, I will go personal vehicle miles traveled, and not bikes.
I would say a user fee. I won't commit to necessarily a distance-based fee because it might be a function of time or something else. But I think that a user fee with a clearly defined metric as far as what the user is expected to pay for the facility. Like freeways, 100% should be paid by users who are using the freeways. Transit, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 75%, maybe it's 40%, whatever it is, but a clearly defined metric so that we understand, so the public understands what they're getting for their money. And that could go through the whole system.
You guys don't want to go?
I'll punt. I'll say it has to be done incrementally. That's not going to, outside of reality, it's still just, you're never going to have a sea change in one legislative session, especially not our current legislative session. I think a big step forward that seems a possibility is allowing the metro area to impose that sales tax. I think it's a half-cent sales tax that would get the state out of funding the local public transit expansion projects, which has been a hurdle for some expansions here locally. I think that's a good step forward. And I'll punt on the rest.
I know there were, okay, please, go ahead.
Like policy related, but I guess the one thing that I haven't heard anybody say talk about millennials and you talk about people who think they're like millennials. But the people in between who have children are not being addressed at all. I like Nice Ride, but I can't take my grandson on it. I don't want to carry my car seat around with me everywhere I go. Car2Go won't even let me put a car in it. Public transit is, if you've ever brought a stroller, and it's getting better, and I work for Metro Transit. My boss is sitting right there, but if you've ever brought a kid in a stroller on the bus and had to take them out and fold up your stroller, and this is a huge untapped market. So if somebody wants a nonprofit or a good business idea, it would be addressing some of those issues, because we're not just moving individual people, it's a society that we're moving.
I would make a comment on that. I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the shared mobility, a lot of the promise of autonomous cars is about one individual making one trip. And that individual could be a piece of cargo or it could be a person. But it's about one-to-one matching. And I think when we start looking at complex trips, which involve multiple people with multiple levels of ability, doing multiple things, that's something that I don't think any of the, what we've been talking about the last couple of days is really addressing. Now, I don't think that that means that they necessarily have to. I mean, I don't think that it's, I think that we can have a lot of niche markets served. But you're right that, a family has to be taken care of. But if you have a family, say it's a family of 4, a family of 5, it's likely over the near to medium term that it's always going to make more sense to just own a car, because you're going to get such utility out of that vehicle that these types of services aren't going to really help you much anyway.
Although you could probably decrease the per number of cars per household.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants that instant gratification of no conflict in scheduling. If you could opt for a different mode most of the time.
I would argue that there used to be a time when you didn't think that you could take your baby and change their diaper, and now you can in almost every bathroom. Right? I think that part of this problem is not just the mode, but thinking about it in a different way. Instead of saying we can't serve this, say how can we serve this? How do we get those multiple trips? What kind of culture shift has to change so that people are not just looking at it as one-to-one?
Well, I would argue that no one's saying certain modes are not saying you can't. There may be some additional pre-planning on that, but okay, stroller on a bus is definitely more of a challenge. Light rail and BRT, not. That's pretty easy. Okay, it's not going to fit on a bike in its present form, but with a car, you can put a car seat in a Zipcar. Do you want to carry it around with you everywhere? No, but I would argue you don't want to have that option of carrying it around with you everywhere. It does require a little extra work and a little extra pre-planning, but you're not left out. Honestly, children require a lot of pre-planning and extra work. Anyway, I don't see why that's any different about mobility.
I'd like to add something to this, because we have actually experimented with it over the years. We have gone through phases where our members have requested the ability to have a car seat, because it's not that you can't do it, and we have families that do it.
Absolutely.
They tend to be very committed people, and I think yes, Jessica. But it takes an extra commitment, and I think there is a danger that sort of millennials have wanted to give up the car, or not have a car for a variety of reasons, as we've seen. But as they get to that age, are we going to lose them again? Because the pressure just becomes too much, and you don't want to be carrying that car seat around. It's not that you can't do it, but it just becomes, the hassle factor becomes so high that people opt out again, and then we lose the momentum that we had gained. And so I think that is a conversation. Like I said, we've experimented with it with low success, I guess. We have one car left, actually, where we still do have a car seat. But we have not successfully implemented it very well. It gets used very, very infrequently, to the point that the lock that holds the box of the car seat is rusted shut, so we have to chop them off. But it is a conversation we continue to have and would like to figure. And I think if someone can figure out a better way to do it, there is a market. There may be a niche market, but for somebody who figures it out, could tap that market in a way that would be interesting to see.
Just real quick, the hope is that vehicles when they become a service as opposed to ownership, in its fullest sense, there's purpose-built vehicles for your need on that day for that trip.